Once a booming area buoyed by the automotive industry, Highland Park, a city just outside of Detroit, has faced decades of blight. In 2011, the city repossessed more than two-thirds of Highland Park's residential streetlights due to outstanding electric bills. The streetlights were removed, literally leaving residents in the dark. It was around this time that a visionary woman known to everyone as Mama Shu decided to embrace a mission of blight to beauty for her Highland Park neighborhood known as Avalon Village. She began buying up crumbling properties on her rundown street, having solar powered lighting installed, renovating buildings or tearing them down and replacing them with new shipping containers to house small shops run by local entrepreneurs. I'll put a link to a clip where she was named one of CNN's heroes in the show notes. One of Avalon Village's great accomplishments is the Homework House, a renovated single family home that now serves as a meeting space for local youth. There, young people can enjoy a warm meal, get help with homework, and gain important life skills. Under the guidance of our guest today, Education Director Boniswa Brock, who was a public school teacher and administrator for 35 years, the Homework House also serves as a warm and welcoming hub for local homeschooled students who enjoy access to the space for classes and enrichment opportunities. Boniswa is currently preparing to launch a STEM focused, child centered preschool called Every Child is a Genius at the Homework House. But she has encountered regulatory snares that have delayed the preschool's opening. We talk about that frustration and more on today's episode. Boniswa Brock, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for inviting me. And I feel it's an honor to be able to share our story because the goal is to help as many people as possible. Because I know so many people in the education realm is dealing with so many challenges. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share.
Well, thank you for being here. I felt honored to meet you in person last year when I visited Detroit and saw the revitalization happening throughout the city and including in Highland Park, and had a chance to see what you're trying to build at the Homework House and this beautiful space in the lower level of the Homework House that is the future home, hopefully, of Every Child is a Genius, this lovely preschool vision that you have to serve local young learners in your community. So we'll hear all about that over the course of the episode. But I'd love to start, if we could, with your experience as a public school educator and administrator for about 35 years. Tell us what that was like, some of those, kind of career highlights, experiences, what you saw in public education.
Well, let me first say that I am a fifth generation educator. My great grandfather was the founder of Morehouse College, and every generation since then, uh, in that patrilineal line, our family has been a part of establishing institutions or supporting educational institutions. So I had in my mind somewhere in the back that I will never be a teacher. Because my mom was a teacher in special education, and I remember helping her check those papers and saying, you don't get paid enough to work on Sunday and do all this work. But here I am 35 years plus later, and I've been mostly focused on science education as a chemistry and physics teacher. I've been an administrator in terms of curriculum development, principal, assistant principal, and an educational consultant. So some of my experiences were um, I found that it was never the children that were the issue. The challenges that I often had were with administrators wanting to keep mainstream, antiquated ideas and concepts in the classroom. Um, Wherever I went, I always tried to have new and innovative ideas around learning, um, whether it was helping my department head figure out how to do double, what they call now block scheduling back in the early 90s, which they didn't want to do, but they did. So I think some of the biggest challenges was just letting go of things that weren't working because the children weren't learning, and trying to make, what is it, fit a square peg into a round hole. It doesn't fit. But the beauty of it was I still have really positive relationships with some of my students from the 80s. I have a student who's in Dubai right now. She's a educator in Dubai. I have a student that is a transportation engineer at Stanford. So I still keep in contact with them. Actually, I know their children, and they've been to the homework house too. So um, the positive is you building those lifelong relationships with students and some faculty. So the challenge is really about innovation and change, and
Mm.
also funding. Funding is always a challenge uh, for public education because there's still huge discrepancies in that, and so that limits what schools can and cannot do also. So that's always a challenge. So those things I found the biggest things in education, public education.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into your vision for Every Child is a Genius, the
Okay.
new preschool, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you saw in the conventional classroom, because I know when I visited with you, you talked about your goal for this preschool is really child-centered, truly embracing this idea that every individual child is a genius. And that didn't come across in the conventional system, which is sort of this mass schooling model that focuses, um, maybe systemically more on the group than the individual. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about your observations in that conventional classroom and what it does to the individual learner.
Wow. Um, well, I'd like to start with just the overall paradigm of what education is. And education means to bring forth or to bring out of. I think the biggest challenge with conventional is shifting the paradigm from I'm the sage on the stage and I'm pouring all this knowledge into your brain because you don't have anything, it's empty. And that's so not true. And until we shift our paradigm of thinking to the children come with greatness, the children come with a divine purpose, and they have skills and dreams and ideas of things they want to do, even as teeny tiny toddlers, right? And that the knowledge of brain development now should change the paradigm because we now know the first 3,000 days to their 5 years old is when the brain grows the most from in vitro to 5 years old. Those dendrite connections are so important. So having the experiences, the multiple languages, all those engagements are so important, but we spend the least money in our five and under, where we should be spending the most and giving them those experiences. Um, as a high school teacher, where most of my time was, it was very test driven. We were teaching to the test. This whole thing around when the concern came about accountability for the state funding that was being spent. It was attached to the success of the students on the test. And so once you make that linear demarcation, uh, the variables in that line just can't fit. And so I found in so many instances teaching to the test. All of January, all of February spent studying for the SAT prep, SAT prep, ACT prep. And so those students who really need enrichment and learning beyond paperwork, and I used to call it, we were the ditto dealers of death. Because back in the day, you used to do ditto sheets, remember? The blue ink.
Yeah, sure.
And I call it ditto dealers of death because it's like mind numbing to our children that I have to fill in this word, fill in this blank. And so it's no critical thinking. It's do what I say. If students ask, why are we doing it? It's because I said so, follow the rules. Um, and running into those roadblocks. But there were throughout my journey, I have found staff that had many ideologies of like mine, and we broke rules. I'll say that. We took children on field trips, which were unapproved. So it's 30 years ago. So hey, I get in trouble for it. But
A
we took children.
permissionless educator you were.
We took children to Chicago and all kinds of activities. So I just always push the envelope with that because um, linear thinking leads to linear activity. And we need to think, in my opinion, more circular, which is inclusive and includes diversity and equity, where linear thinking can be vertical or horizontal, and therefore it's limiting in its scope and perception of what one can do, one can be, and how you manage your classroom based on those ideologies. So for instance, in my classroom, I didn't have rows, I had circles, and I would catch all kinds of problems. Why are you changing your room? Why are you doing, just I don't want lines in my classroom. I want the children to sit together in groups. Um, yeah, even now I am an adjunct professor at a community college, and I'm in a couple of schools now, and it's like what it was in the 80s. And I'm like, why do you have your classroom set up like this?
Hmm.
And still challenges even with technology, the children having access to computers. I'm scratching my head saying, why am I struggling with getting computers for the children? So it's changing I think the root of it is the changing the paradigm so that the adults and parents really understand how brilliant our children are. And if we could shift that paradigm to a new educational paradigm that every child is a genius, I think so much would structurally change, because I don't believe people believe children are smart, that
Right.
they believe we have to give them their intelligence instead of pull out of them the intelligence that's already in them, and then enable them the opportunities to develop into these great, wonderful human beings that are waiting inside to become. We just won't, the adults won't shift gears, but the children are forcing us, because I go into class now and this is all they do. They're on their
On
phones
their
the whole
phones.
time.
Yeah.
And so it's the paradigm is shifting. They're either going to drop out, which they're doing intellectually, or and we really have to shift gears because the schools are failing our children.
So
So I don't know
you
if that answered your question.
Yes, no, for sure. I mean, so you tried to be permissionless within the system, and sounds like you had like-minded colleagues, and you would break rules and try to do whatever you could to bring out that genius and help your students to flourish and realize their full potential. And now you're working sort of outside the system or system adjacent with the homework house, supporting students after school through homework assistance as well as homeschoolers during the day. And then again, we'll talk about your new preschool shortly. But
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that journey. How did you get connected with Mama Shu and Avalon Village? And how did the homework house come to be?
My journey with Mama Shu is about 25 years. I actually met her when we both were at a high school, Martin Luther King Junior Senior High School in Detroit, Michigan. And throughout the journey, she was an amazing administrative assistant. If you needed something, you asked Mama Shu. So we, kept affiliations through time, and then eventually her children attended a school where I was the science teacher. So I became her children's science teacher. And from there, she began working at the school, and we've kept a friendship ever since then. And what solidified our relationship in many ways was when her first son was killed by a not drive by, oh God, what's the word? When they hit and run. My son and her older son were very good friends. And my son mentored him through that process. He was his best, like, right hand guy. And that solidified our relationship. He stayed at our home for a week or two, and just to be with another friend that he could find that solace and peace with. So that kind of brought our relationship in from that tragedy closer. And over time, just I remember when she talked about purchasing the Moon Ministry, the first house she purchased, and I was one of those that said, "No, don't buy that house. You don't need to renovate that house, girl," because that was after her son's death, and I felt she deserved better. I thought, why start there? Why don't you, move further out, get a beautiful home? Why spend time renovating? You've had this tragedy.
Which a lot of people were doing, right? I mean, Highland Park was being largely abandoned. But she
Absolutely.
said, no, I want to revitalize this neighborhood, right?
She did. And I was one of those that said, I don't know, but I love you, so I'll be there for you. So I always supported her either financially from afar or volunteering with the events and things that she did. And then my close affiliation with the school came when I made the decision. It was really during COVID. I'd always spun around in my mind wanting to have a school of my own called Every Child is a Genius for the past maybe 15 years. And there are a couple of experiences that I had that just made me want to do this. But in terms of our affiliation, closer was during COVID. I was talking to her about, opening up a school. I want to have Every Child is a Genius, just pre COVID. And she said, sure, you can have 2 lots across the street to start raising money for the school. So I got architectural renderings, website, everything. Then COVID, boom. So of course, foundations, funding, it's like, we're not talking to anybody right now. So she said, why don't you just come and put the school in the basement? Just start there. And I said, I don't want to, but okay. So we started that process. And then she says, well, I need somebody to help me write grants. So I said, okay. And then she said, I need somebody maybe, once we get the homework house. I said, okay, I'll do that too. So kind of in exchange for, and she's been a sweetheart through this 2.5 year journey. She hasn't charged me anything for leasing the space in the basement or, because had I been in any other building or any other space, they would have charged me to house my furniture and equipment and all that. And she hasn't done that. Um, so that's how I came to be the director of Avalon Village, and working with her is just, and being a witness bearer to her manifestation of her dream, and
Mm.
witnessing her sacrifice, and just her ideology and spirituality strengthens me. And it's just an amazing journey of love. It really is. It's an amazing journey of love and sacrifice beyond yourself.
Well, and Avalon Village is just spectacular. The homework house is stunning. Such a warm and welcoming space. I know that the public library in Highland Park shut down a while ago, and so you've been able to bring in library books and other, books and resources into homework house to sort of fill that gap. You've got sewing machines, you've got chessboards, you've got all kinds of games and enrichment for learners. How do young people use the homework house, both as an after school resource and for homeschoolers?
Um, the after school program pretty much is on Tuesdays, Thursdays. We have classes that the children utilize. We have chess and art. We have, like you said, sewing on Saturdays. We have a crocheting class. And we we did earlier in the year have a textile class. We had a master seamstress who just came back from Ghana, Mama Nana, who learned many new skills in terms of tie dyeing and other crafts from the Akan people in Ghana. So she's going to be sharing some of that with our children in the spring. She's an elder and she doesn't want to, be in the sub-zero temperatures. But the children usually come in around 3:30, 4 o'clock. If they have homework, well, we let them get a snack, something to eat, um, maybe play a little bit. don't move directly right into tutoring. Maybe they'll have one class or one activity. And then after that one, we find out if they have any homework. And I'll put a glitch in this, footnote in this. I'm finding, since we've been open, that a lot of teachers aren't giving homework. So I'm working with a faculty member. I won't mention the school. He pulled me aside after I wasn't getting any homework assignments done by our students. And he said to me, Professor Brock, I think part of the reason why you're not getting a lot of feedback is I haven't given homework in 10 years. I said, this is a college preparatory school. What huh? How do you not give homework to high school students? So I think the idea from the state was that students would roll over, teachers would roll over into projects. So it wouldn't be necessarily a piece of paper that you take home for homework, but you would do research, individual lessons to get your projects done. Well, that's not happening because I asked the students, I apologized to them. I said, I apologize. I did not know you haven't had a homework most of your education. And I said, who in here has really not have consistent homework? And I said, who in here has had consistent homework? Only 3 students raised their hand, and they went to private schools. So what we're finding is we have to give them things to do. We have this amazing computer table that we finally got functioning. Yes. So they love to be on that. So we put educational activities on there. And then more of the teachers are infusing language and literacy in what they're teaching. So, for instance, our art teacher, um, she asked questions about history. We did the Dia de los Muertos altars and things like that. So she talked about history, the language of Mexico. So we're infusing more education into what we're doing because we're finding they don't have much homework at all. So that's a huge shift for us because we've the homework house, right?
And you're also serving homeschoolers. Their
Yes, ma'am.
population has grown since COVID as well. I wonder what you're seeing in the local homeschooling community and how you've been able to collaborate with them.
One of the organizations we've collaborated with is Engaged Detroit. I've talked a couple times with them and some of their parents. We've done some activities together. Um, this year our population is a little. I mean, we did really well September, October, but since it's been cold, they haven't really been coming out. We now have 2 families that are really, really still active. We now have a coordinator that helps with the families. We've done orientations. We're doing more online with families. They call for information, they ask for help, but they're not actually coming out to the facility like they were last year. So we're trying to do new strategies. Maybe we need to put money toward getting a bus. We're just doing a little more demographics to figure out what's the challenges. And even last year, one of the things that the mother said was challenges was transportation.
Mm.
I don't know if you know, Michigan has the highest insurance rate than any state in the country, and so keeping a car and then having poor public transportation makes a huge barrier for several of our families. So, but we do have the families that do engage. We did have we had a what did we do? We've done a lot of activities and uh, they engage a lot in our classes in the afternoon too. So they'll come in
Mm.
right around noon and then they'll stay for maybe till 5, 6 o'clock and finish up with those extracurricular activities. But they've set up instead of the daycare, they're in the basement, and they enjoy the space and people come in. Sometimes they stay for a week and then they don't come back. So we're trying to do an analysis to figure out what are those challenges so we can, get that core group, especially now that we have 2 moms who really want to be responsible for the co-op and really working. So they're
Mm.
constantly talking with their friends. And I think that's part of it too. What they've done is they've developed their own communication with their own cohorts and share that knowledge with them too. So hopefully this spring we'll be able to bring them into the homework house, and because they share a lot of resources. We still share resources, and we have a lot of giveaways. So for instance, we had Shining Star during the holidays. So we give a lot of educational stuff out during the holidays too. So um, even if they're not coming to the homework house all the time, we're constantly having small events to give stuff away. So even during the holidays, we gave away educational games. We still give away school supplies every time we, because we do know they
Yeah.
run out and parents can't afford them. So that's been a challenge this fall, is really galvanizing them to come back and engage. We found that the ones that we did have, many of them defaulted to sending their children back to school because they had to work. And so, yeah, that COVID, helped push, alternative learning, which was amazing. But when you had to go back to work, yeah. So we have a few challenges with that. So we're still working at it. We're not going to quit.
Well, and I love that you're collaborating with Engage Detroit. We've had founder Bernita Bradley on the podcast, now serving somewhere around 250 homeschooled learners in Detroit through Engage Detroit and that resource. So great to see that you're working there and trying to figure out some of the transportation hurdles and other challenges that might be preventing families that want to homeschool from being able to do so. So, Boniswa, let's switch gears and talk
Okay.
about every child is a genius. And I want to start with asking you to tell us a little bit more about something you said earlier, which was there were a couple of reasons why you've been wanting to start a school for the past 15 years. Tell us more about that. What were those reasons why?
Well, um, the first one was I became a parent. And I am a parent of two geniuses. And I learned very early that my daughter was a gifted learner. And it was when she was 6 years old. She was at prior to that, she was in a daycare school, which was allowed her to accelerate at her own pace. But she became a behavior problem at 6 years old. And I was like, how can a 6 year old become a behavior problem? It's kindergarten, first grade. What the heck? You're supposed to be having fun. And I was an educator at the time. I was teaching chemistry at the time. And it just puzzled me how my daughter could be a behavior problem. But come to find out, what it was she was actually doing all the work and talking the whole time, but she was getting all A's. She was getting everything done perfectly. So I had to advocate for her. And she ended up getting double promoted because she got tested. The teacher was against doing double promoting her, but she wasn't going to give her an individualized program. So I was like, I can't have my 6 year old child decide she hates school at 6 years old and ingest this concept that she's a behavior problem, because she was then labeled as a bad kid, and I'm like, no, she's brilliant and you just won't meet her needs. So she's going to be a problem because she's bored. But didn't want to hear that. And I thought, no, there's no justice in that. I'm not going to do that. So I had to fight for her. Then I had my son. He was just opposite. He was a kinesthetic learner, highly kinesthetic, like slide across the floor, build anything. He walked at, 8.5 months. He played basketball by the time he was 2. He was a drummer. Anything, he rode a bicycle with no training wheels at 2. I mean, he was just highly kinesthetic. Everything was move, 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 move. So, of course, we all know that's a problem in the classroom. So he could have easily been labeled ADHD. I mean, he did start getting those labels. And I was like, no, you're just not teaching him in a way that he learns best. And I went back and forth, back and forth. So I finally pulled him out and found another school. So those two things, raising children that learn out of the norm, and 75% of our children do. 75% of our children are visual kinesthetic learners. They're not auditory learners at all. And and those children suffer a lot. Actually, I did my master's thesis on that, on multiple intelligences, and um, I found in my thesis that children who I tested that were kinesthetic were often found to be the behavior problems in class because they learn by doing, not by sitting in a desk. So that also in my master's thesis guided me toward saying we have to do something different. And then with the development of brain research and understanding that really children are born geniuses, that we just don't believe that because we have, the old antiquated ideas about what intelligence is and how it's measured and the IQ tests, and it's that's old and not even necessary. And what one of the things that scientifically solidified it was the Torrance creativity
Oh,
test.
sure. Yeah.
And it was a Dr. Land at NASA that used that test with I think it was 1,500 children, and he did a longitudinal study and found that 98% of the children tested at 4 and 5 years old tested as creative geniuses. And he kept that study for 30 years and then it matriculated on. It was just the opposite. Only 2% were still geniuses after 30 years. And the only thing they had in common was mandatory education, K through 12. That's the only thing they all had in common. And so the question came, well, what happened to them? What happened to them that they lost their capacity to be creative geniuses? And so I was like, nah, that's no. We have to do this. So every child really is a genius. We just don't have the framework, nor do we as adults believe it. And so therefore we don't develop the structures. But in terms of the need to have pre kindergarten, was there were uh, in the early 2000s here in Detroit, we had we got casinos, and so there were articles that kept coming out about families losing their children because they were putting their leaving their children in the cars in the casinos parking lots. And I was like, oh my God, people don't even have enough money to pay for a daycare. There's no drop-off daycare centers for parents, and then addition to the whole idea of the addiction of gambling. And so that was I said, someone has to help the children. So that was something in the back of my mind. We have to have something. So my initial desire was to have a 24-hour daycare for those types of challenges for parents that was educational, but yet safe for them to leave their children. And one that just broke my heart was there was a mother who'd done everything right in her mind. Um, she had a toddler and an older 10-year-old, I believe it was. And she had to leave for work. And she's in public transportation. She was getting public assistance. And then, you had to keep your public assistance. You had to work. And we all know it was low paying wage job. And, a lot of times if you don't get to work, you lose your job. So she had a babysitter that was on the way to the house. So there was this gap, maybe of a half an hour, if that much. And there was a hole in the floor of her house, and the basement was flooded. And the toddler fell through the base to the basement and drowned. And that mother was prosecuted for second-degree manslaughter. And I said, everything failed this woman. The landlord should have cleaned, there shouldn't have been a flood. And nobody talked about that. Everybody just talked about this woman who was neglectful of her baby. And I'm like, how is it this mother who's working full time, trying to raise her children, can't put her child somewhere safely? It just didn't make sense to me. And then, of course, COVID hit, and I was like, okay, well, we have to do this because this doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah. And so you had this idea, now is the time. I'm going to create this preschool in this beautiful space in this
Excuse me, I have to plug in my battery. I thought I had it in. I'll be sorry. I'm back.
and yeah,
I'm
and
sorry.
so you had this idea to build this preschool in this beautiful house in this rejuvenating neighborhood of Avalon Village and help to deal with this childcare crisis. The fact that, as you say, that there are parents who want safe nurturing spaces for their children while they're working and that they're not readily available and accessible to them. So you said, okay, great. I'm going to be part of the solution. I'm going to be an education entrepreneur, create this space. It seems so straightforward that you could just open your doors, but it wasn't so easy. Tell us a little bit about those startup challenges.
Well, I do have to first say I really appreciate the Vela Foundation, because after COVID hit, they were one of the first foundations that were willing to give funding for educational entrepreneurs. So the first thing I did, I applied for a $10,000 grant for super science sessions for Every Child is a Genius, where I had science activities in physics, chemistry, environmental studies, and they did give me a $10,000 grant. So I was able to do that at Avalon Village for 2021 and throughout the summer into the fall and winter. So we did all kinds of stuff, kite flying, robotics. We did, so that money helped me to be able to do that, which I was hoping would help me move into opening the school because I got the families, we were working with children like a year and a half to 11 years old. So that was like my core group of families that as we renovated the space and got the basement prepared to do that. So the two glitches that two glitches. I'll just talk about the two main ones. There's been several along the way, like they couldn't find my paperwork, so I had to resubmit it 3 times. Just a lot of infrastructural stuff. That's
And
the least.
and by they, you mean what?
I'm sorry, the state of Michigan. I've had 4 consultants since I've started this process, and due to sickness, due to retirement, all they've moved on. And the first glitch was during COVID. The consultant got really sick and didn't return, but she didn't forward her files to the next person. So I'm sitting waiting, emailing her and trying to find out what's going on. Let's move this process forward. And nobody's responding. So I finally go to the next person up the chain of command and they say, oh, sorry, Miss Brock. It's been 90 days. We didn't, and she's sick. I was like, okay. So that was the first glitch. But
And this is to become a licensed childcare center
yes,
for
to
the
be a
state of
life.
Michigan. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
So
you for
there's
correcting.
the paperwork challenges initially. Okay. What else?
Yes, yes. So, we were ready to go. I had gotten the lead inspection, the health inspection. The lead inspection was $1,500. The health inspection was $350. The application was $300. We gotten all the furniture. We had set it all up. It's perfect, ready to go. The technology, and had the fire inspector out. Our first challenge was I had the wrong fire inspector come out. He was a local fire inspector, and he came through and he told us everything we should have in the school, right? And come to find out, when he gave me his inspection report, I sent it to my consultant, and she said, "Oh, Miss Brock, this is the wrong inspection. You can't have a local fire inspector. You have to have a state inspector." So I was like, "Well, why didn't he say something?" So I hired a state fire inspector, an additional $300, came in, and he immediately said that our geothermal furnace had to be insulated, thermalized, that we would have to insulate the room because all furnace rooms have to be insulated. And I read the standard and it said combustibility. Well, there's no gas in the building. So there's no fire. And then he said, well, you have a water heater. I said, it's an electric water heater, sir. So he looked at it and said, I said, so everything in here is electric or geothermal. It's not combustibility. Well, the state doesn't have any laws related to geothermal energies and child care centers, so you're just going to have to do it. So I said, okay. So it didn't make sense to me. It was illogical. And I said, but I got people to come out anyway to give me estimates about how much it would cost to do this. So because this furnace is gigantic and it has all these different pipes and things that you would have to insulate around, it was going to cost, I got as low as 15,000 up to $22,000 because the thermalized ceiling tiles that would have to go between all those pipes, it was meticulous work. It would take many, many hours and days to do it. So I said, this still doesn't settle with me. So I was at an Engaged Detroit function with you and Molly from the Michigan Mackinac
That's Molly
College.
Masick, who
Molly
runs
Mason, yes.
education initiatives for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Michigan. Yep.
And I was expressing my situation, and she said, I'll help you. I'll help you. And within 10 days of her putting her team on it, she sent me their technical manual, the whole manual. And then she told me, look on page 183. Your inspector got it wrong. And I was like, it's taken a year. And in the meantime, I'd been contacting my local senators, Congress people, my pre-licensed consultant with the state of Michigan, my child care licensed person. They were contacting whoever they had, and it was crickets. It's like nobody knew, nobody could find anything. It's like, well, you're just going to have to do that. And I'm like, this still doesn't make sense to me. So, thanks to Molly and her team, that's one checklist that we do not have to do. And even after I sent it to the fire inspectors that had inspected, they haven't said anything either. So I've got to follow up with them and say, okay, what's going on, guys? It's just amazing to
But
me.
now you have maybe some more advocates in your corner to
Yes,
help push this
have
along. Although it's so frustrating that it takes all of this effort and all of these resources for something that should be relatively straightforward and that would help to alleviate the childcare shortages.
That's what
Um,
our goal was to do. I
yeah.
had families lined up. I lost all my families. I've lost revenue, all of that, and they were forced to find other facilities, and so that was, that wasn't good. But
But you still have one more barrier. So the
yes,
the geothermal heating source, which again, you're trying to be, green energy. So much of Avalon Village is solar powered or self-sustaining. So you're trying to really be forward looking with your energy use and
yes,
sustainability. And here, of course, that's not being captured by regulators in a positive way. But you have other challenges too before you can open your doors. Tell us about that other challenge.
the next major challenge is our egress window. And our Highland Park fire inspector told us that's what we had to put in, which was a $7,000 window. Um, and it has steps and a ladder that the children can climb out. It's an easy door that opens up, but it's aesthetically a window. So when I had the state fire inspector come in, he said, that's not acceptable. You have to put in a fire door and have stairs or ramp leading to the grade of the ground outside. And so I was like, we just had uh, we paid a state guy that knew what he was talking about to come in. So what I found out was that the rule is, well, the standard is that because we are a commercial property, that we have to follow the commercial standard. However, structurally, the homework house is a house. So I'm hoping the exemption will come in where if I was a home care daycare, that egress window would be acceptable. So I'm hoping to I've actually sent in all the pictures, and I'm waiting for a response back from the state to see if our egress window would be acceptable, because I did get some estimates also on that, and it's in the tens of thousands of dollars because it's cement. And because it's an older home, we have to put in, steel beams across the side. It's just that level of investment is a little bit much. Considering we already put 7,000 into the window already, it's like, come
Right.
on.
Right.
So it's interesting. The other things that we have to do is we have to put a few more other doors in, fire extinguisher, which we have to do anyway. So that's not a lot of cost. But and we have those things too throughout the building. But it's just those are some huge costs for something that we're only going to have, 10 to 15 children in that space anyway. So it's like the window, if I was a resident of that home, would be acceptable. And so can we get an exemption to that for that purpose?
So, I hear this story and I think, well, it's no wonder we have childcare shortages because
Yes.
willing and enthusiastic entrepreneurs like you are coming up against all of these bureaucratic roadblocks. Um, and you've spent many months and many thousands of dollars to try to get this beautiful space up and running, and it is absolutely lovely. It's all set to go. It's got all of its furniture, all of your learning supplies and materials. It's really just beautiful. Have you ever thought about giving up, or are you just really committed to being an education entrepreneur and making this happen regardless of all of these hurdles?
I think it's in my blood, Carrie. I think it's in my blood. I have had moments where I was ready to quit, but then I look at those homeschool babies and I said, no, they deserve better. I look at the moms who struggle to come and get the services, and I said, no, they deserve better. And now that I'm back in the classroom, it's just been, it's glad, like I you can't quit, you know. There's a Sweet Honey in the Rock. I used to sing their song. It's called We Who Believe in Freedom Cannot Rest. Um, I've kind of taken that mantra on. I think it's partly because my family lineage just fighting for educational options and choices and freedom. Um, no, I really, there's down days when you just like, I'll forget this. But it's like, no. And you look in those cute faces and they call you and they say, Mama Bo, can I come over? And it's like, sure, come. So, no, the fight is on. And again, I've even looked at other facilities, but rent is so high now in Detroit, and the monies it would take to renovate a facility. But I am still fighting. I finally got my 501c3. So the goal now is the one of the goals is to open up a 3-story school across the street. That's still on the table. So I'm gonna
For K to for school age children then?
no, this is
Oh,
gonna be for
for pre-K
pre-K.
too? Oh, great.
Yeah,
Okay.
but one of the engineers who I've talked to about building the school building, he said, "I'm telling you, Mama Bo, once you get the little ones in there, parents are gonna want to expand." He said, "Because at first I had it just as a 1.5-story structure." He said, "No, you might as well put another because you're gonna grow." And he says, I've built other schools, and he said, they say they're pre-kindergarten, first grade, and then parents don't want to leave. He
Sure.
said, so you might as well build it, pre-K to 5. And so that's really the goal, is to put a school across the street. Mama Shoe is set aside 2.5 lots, about a good almost acre of land, so I could build the school there. And I've had estimates on that. And now that I got the 501c3, the goal was to open up the daycare, use the Torrance creativity test on my curriculum, which is called K4, Knowing in the Fourth Dimension. And its tenets are: we use kinesiology, kinesthetic learning, kinetic energy, and knowledge as the 4 tenets of learning in this STEAM framework. So I was going to test my curriculum to see that it was for gifted education, and then, apply for funding that way, because it takes a good 2-3 years to make that happen. But the 2-3 years has gone by, and
Mhm.
that hasn't happened. So I'm look to foundations, and if there's any philanthropist out there that wants to help, um, that's the one goal, is to actually build a school across the street, and then we would revert the daycare in the basement to infant care,
Mm.
because we weren't doing infant care at first. So the
Mhm.
idea was to deal with the toddlers now, move to the school, and then include the infancy care, because that's another challenge here you got to go back to work after 6 weeks. So who takes care of the babies? That's another challenge.
Well,
So
I think your builder is right that you're going to have the toddlers and preschoolers in there, and then the parents are going to say, "No, we need an elementary school," and you're going to have your elementary school, and then they're going to say, "Please open a middle school and please open a high school." So I hope the future is bright and that many more learners are able to benefit from your vision of believing in each child and seeing each child, every child, as a genius. It's just wonderful to see the way in which Avalon Village and Highland Park are being revitalized due to its extraordinary people like you and Mama Shu who really believe in that community and want to see it flourish. So, if people are listening and want to learn more about Every Child is a Genius and the Homework House and your efforts, or if we have friendly philanthropists also listening who want to support your work, what is the best way for them to find you?
um, I have a website, www.everychildisagenius. I also have an Instagram page as Every Child is a Genius. Um, and you could email me at everychildisagenius@gmail.com. And the Avalon Village is the Avalon Village. Please don't type in Avalon Village because then you'll get a retirement home in Florida. So you have to make sure you type in the, because we've had people do that and they'll sign up for an event or volunteer work in Florida and like, how did I get in Florida? So those words, those are very important. So anyway, the Avalon Village, and there are tabs on the website to sign up for volunteer, to donate. Also on my website is QR codes to donate and things like that. So yeah, we
Wonderful.
got
And
we
it's
have we have a lot of work to do, Carrie. I appreciate your organization and what you're doing to enhance and to highlight educational entrepreneurs because it's so important because the paradigm has to just really shift. It has to change because every child really is a genius and we really have to get our minds on that because I'll just say Japan just landed on the moon, but our rockets didn't make it. So our children have to be educated. They have to learn, you know. Okay, that's another conversation, but
So it's
yes.
theavalonvillage.org. Every Child is a Genius on Instagram and on email. I'll have links to all of this in the show notes. I'm just so thrilled to talk with you and just really excited to see the growth, not only of this preschool, which I am confident will get up and running sooner than later, especially now that you have ambassadors in your corner and
Yes.
that this will grow to serve even more school age children down the road as well. So, Boniswa Brock, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you, Carrie McDonough. I appreciate you so much. And I look forward to you coming back to Detroit.
I
And
can't
hopefully when you
wait.
come back next, we'll be open.
I would love that. Yes, wonderful. Can't
I'll make
wait.
sure you get an invitation to our opening.
Perfect.